Are we smart enough to know how smart plants are? In 2017, biologist Frans de Waal raised an intriguing question about animal intelligence. Are we smart enough to know how smart animals are? Some animals, like primates, look a lot like us, but there are countless other species, beings with different senses, bodies, and different ways of life that seem entirely foreign. Still, we've come to recognize the intelligence of these kinds of species, like honeybees and octopuses. And we're only just starting to learn to ask the right questions, ones that don't come from our sort of narrow, human-centric point of view. So could the same be true for plants? Might it just be the case that they are intelligent, but that we just fail to ask the right questions? Or are plants a bridge too far? Welcome to this Radboud Reflects event. My name is Bas van Wilkem-Roker. I'm the moderator of this evening, and I'm very excited that we're joined today by Paco Calvo. Paco Calvo is a cognitive scientist and a philosopher at the University of Murcia in Spain, where he heads the MINT Lab, which stands for the Minimal Intelligence Lab. And he's a leading figure in the study of plant intelligence, author of the book Planta Sapiens, and we're very happy that he's here with us today to share his work. Before I give the floor to Paco, I have a few questions for you. So I can't see you. There you are. Who would consider chimpanzees as intelligent? Yeah, that is definitely maybe all of the audience. Who would consider earthworms to be intelligent? Well, that is still quite a lot of people for the humble earthworm. And who considers plants as intelligent? That is still most of the audience. That was not expected. You don't need to convince anyone. No, that was it. I hope Paco will still have a lot to teach you about plant intelligence. When I stop talking in a minute, Paco will give a 40-minute lecture about his work. After that, there is a 25-30-minute discussion between Paco and I. And at the end, there's about 50 minutes for your questions. So if you have any, please keep them for the end. Without further ado, warm applause for Paco Calvo.
Okay, he told me to keep an eye on the watch. I will. Yeah, well, that's great. So many of you raised your hand when we asked about plans. Yeah, that's, well, what can we do now, right? You already believe it, so there's nothing else we can do. But there is a little problem. That one of my concerns, actually I was telling you when we were having dinner, in the preface of Planta Sapiens, I say, hey, we've got to be careful with both the skeptics that might say plants cannot possibly be intelligent. They have no neurons, they have no, how can they be intelligent? But we also have to be careful with those that do want to believe it before they have the evidence. So I don't want you to believe it because you are romanticizing plants, because you have your gut feeling, because, yeah, sure, I mean, wow, beautiful, great. Of course they are. No, but because we understand the reasons why they are intelligent, or why science, has a saying, right? How can we explain it, right? And anyway, so it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I love this place. Yesterday we were checking some short films, and I already got to see the looks, and it's beautiful setting and atmosphere and everything. And especially thanks to the technicians, they asked me, hey, Paco, is there any song you would like to play before we get started? Any of you can speak Spanish? Sí, ¿verdad? Did you hear the last song before Bas came on stage? Because, well, it was a very nice song, and I just love it. And I told them to play it, and it says, no pienso en nada. I don't think about anything, or I think about nothing, right? So he asked about the smarts of chimpanzees. We all said, hey. Smarts of earthworms, humble earthworms, we all said, yes. Plants, yes, but he didn't ask about the smarts of humans. Who thinks humans are intelligent? Right? Okay. Okay, well, look. Well, some, right? Okay. Well, that's a good way to get started, because some plants might be intelligent, others might not be, right? So let's judge the smarts of individuals, not of species or baskets, right? This is an abstract category. He said, like, are you intelligent and why? Why? What sort of behavior you exhibit that makes me think that you are intelligent, right? So let's talk about the individual itself, right? And another way to put it, I mean, are we smart enough to know how smart plants are? Was the original title I had in mind. Now you have the answer, right? Now you have the answer. Maybe we are not there yet. We are not that smart. We keep missing something. And unfortunately, this little thing that, in my view, we keep missing has to do with education. We are not there yet because we are not in the right frame of mind. You know, I keep thinking a lot about textbooks. You know, our students, or if you're a student, I see many ages here, or you were students once upon a time, you know, you could do great at school, right? So you have a textbook. If you are good, you spend a few hours a day, you know, you're disciplined, you study every day a few hours, you have good memory, you don't party too much, and okay, good. I can parrot what the textbook says. And the day of the exam, you can nail it. You can nail it. But you know what the problem with this strategy is? That you can nail it at any point in time. So Ptolemy students, thinking that the Earth sat at the center of the universe, would nail it. Because the textbook, that's what it said, right? The textbook said, hey, the Earth sits here, everything revolves around. And then if you're a good student, you go to your textbook, then the day of the exam, you get the highest mark, right? And you know what the problem is? Is that we don't realize that in a sense, we are the Ptolemies of the future generations. So it's so easy to laugh at this guy. Oh my God, a few centuries ago, how could they think that the Earth was stuck, sitting at the center? Were they stupid or what? No way. They were doing the best science they had available at their disposal. They were doing great. I mean, they were explaining many things. What they could observe, they had the best models they had. And you, as a student, you could follow the textbook and do great. Now, the question is that we have this cartoonish understanding of, you know, things that we already know went wrong. But what do we make of today's textbooks? So just picture yourself in 100 years' time. Not yourself in 100 years' time, it's going to be, right? But that generation, 21, 25, okay, 21, 25, what will they laugh at of today's textbooks, right? That's what we need to be thinking, that we are the Ptolemies of the future generations, right? So that's what happens when you go to school. My son, you know, when I started working on the first draft of Planta Sapiens, I didn't have the title yet, so it was like a plant cognition, the next revolution. It was like just like toying with that idea before I thought of Planta Sapiens, right? And then I told my son, we were on sabbatical in Edinburgh, writing the book with my family. My son, I told him, hey, Paquillo, little Paco, Paquillo, can you draw the cover of the book? But I didn't want to bias him. So I was like, I'm not going to tell you what I understand or what I mean by plant intelligence, just to see what he comes up with. So just do by yourself, just draw something. And that's what he drew. You see? Now, go back to the song that was playing, the Spanish song. No pienso en nada. I don't think about anything, or I think about nothing. That's what we need to be doing. We need to forget about ourselves, to remove ourselves from the picture, if we are to put ourselves in their shoes, in the shoes of the plant. To think them in themselves, for themselves, we need to forget about ourselves. No pensar en nada. You see what I mean? Otherwise, we can't help it. We think of them through our human-centric eyes, right? So that type of human-centrism there are so many biases we fall prey of. So many biases. So in the preface of Planta Sapiens, I speak of navel-gazing, because there are so many. So we are human-centric, animal-centric. If you're not an animal, you cannot do well. You've got to be an animal, right? Neurocentric. If you don't have neurons, sorry, you've got to have neurons. For some reason, we think neurons are special, right? So you've got to have neurons. If you don't have neurons, sorry. Locomotion-centric. You've got to walk on 2 legs, on 4 legs. So if you don't walk around, sorry, you are sessile, you are rooted, you are potted, like this plastic plant, right? So, well, you cannot be smart. So you've got to locomote, you've got to have neurons, you've got to be an animal, and if you resemble me, human-centric, even better. So we are providing like the gold standard. We are so cute, so intelligent, right? So, if you're intelligent, it's because you resemble me to a certain degree. No, remove yourself from the picture. And we are not good at doing that, right? We are very bad at that. So I had to reach out somewhere else. Where do you reach out for help? Well, thought that non-Western scientists might be more on the same page, right? More able to resonate, right? So certainly, I thought, well, let's see the Dalai Lama. So this was a conference we had at Dharamsala in the residence in exile in India, in North India, where he lives. And there was this conference with Western scientists, Jonathan Birch and Eva Jablonka, like some others included, and Buddhist monks, right? And they said, hey, if you have a book, whatever, just bring a complimentary copy for His Holiness, and blah, blah, blah. So we were all queuing there. There was COVID time with the masks. They removed the mask for the handing. So we were there queuing with our books, like getting, right? Okay. And then you had your minute of glory, right? So here was my minute of glory. You are the Dalai Lama. Okay, do you mind playing the role now? So I went, handed the copy to him and said, hey, Planta Sapiens, right? Like, hey, okay, sure. If he doesn't get it, who's gonna get it, right? Well, what do you think he said? There's no catch. Right? Right? Yeah? We all know? What a disappointment. Well, no, not a disappointment. I learned a great lesson. So if he had nodded in agreement, if he had, oh, yeah, sure, Planta Sapiens, and I said, yeah, sure, I wouldn't have learned all I did learn. Because he said, this is what he said, literally, because it stuck. It's really, ingrained in my brain. He said, no way, only animals can feel. And I was like, oh my God, 20 hours flight to get here to hear this. No, I couldn't believe it. But it was way better. It was way better, because from things you don't expect is where you can get great lessons. Because it allowed me to realize that our biases, our prejudices, our navel-gazing goes way deeper than Western science. You see? So this is a way better response. It gave me a lot of food for thought. I think, hey, there is a lot of work to do. This is not just simply we are, reductionist, mechanistic, Western science. No. In any culture whatsoever, we have biases. And there is a huge bias. And in fact, I got to understand why he responded along these lines. He gave us a copy in response. This is an arm race. You give me a book, I give you another one. So he had his box of books prepared for all of us. Like, pop, 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 pop. And then he gave us his book. And I mean it. So I literally spotted this passage flying back to Spain. And I was like, oh my God, now I got it. You see that passage? Locomotion. Locomotion. So you've got to locomote to feel. You see the navel-gazing thing? Locomotion, neurons, animals. So we can't help it. We are navel-gaze, right? So we really need to do something about it. All of us, not just Western scientists. What is it like to be a plant? So what is it like to be a plant? We really need to make an effort. But remember, no pienso en nada. Forget about yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. You're going to be thinking of the skull. No, put yourself in the shoes of the plant. The plant doesn't give a damn about your skull. That's a human-centric attitude, right? So, okay? So this is plenty of work to do, right? Now, well, this is Jonathan Birch. We were talking about him before. Pain. Who feels pain? So Bas was asking about who you reckon is intelligent. We can say, hey, and pain? Who feels pain, right? So, the more and more we dig in within the animal kingdom, because of course, animals, you've got to be an animal. Then, you don't need to be a mammal, you don't need to be a primate, you don't need to have a neocortex. Look at birds, corvids, they do amazing stuff. We are starting to appreciate their doings. Oh, look at cephalopods. Who hasn't watched My Octopus Teacher? And people now think, oh my God, octopuses, it's amazing what they do, right? Now, invertebrates in general. Oh, honeybees, fruit flies, termites, so you name it. But the more scientific knowledge we gather, the more we realize that, hey, this is all over the board, all over the place, across what? Across the animal kingdom or across the tree of life? I would say the second, right? Across the tree of life. It has to do with life, not with belonging to the animal kingdom. I don't know why a sponge stuck in a rock has to be doing better than a sequoia tree. I mean, it's just the fact that you belong to the animal kingdom. Why don't we think about what the individual is doing? What amazing things, how complex, how sophisticated this system is, right? Regardless of which kingdom it belongs to, right? But you think, this is, well, the reason I'm bringing my colleague Jonathan Birch here is because he was, together with a group of scientists and philosophers in the UK, the UK Parliament, Westminster, asked them for some technical report to be empirically informed as to, they needed to pass a law, to pass a bill in Parliament for the welfare of animals. Hey, if you're going to cook a lobster, well, don't drop it into the boiling water being alive, because lobsters suffer. But is that your hunch? Do you have the vague idea that they suffer? Or do you have the scientific evidence that they do suffer? Well, they went on with a list of signatures or markers of sentience, like check, check, check. And then if you check a few of those boxes, we say, hey, sure, I mean, these guys suffer. So treat them with respect, right? So some of them are like sensory integration. You can integrate sensory information coming from many channels. You can, be responsive to analgesics or anesthetic treatment. You can exhibit pretty sophisticated forms of learning. And if you learn, hey, somebody's at the wheel. If I learn to connect the dots to, hey, oh, this means that. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, something is going on here, and not simply, a bunch of molecules and cells in a soup, right? And then, we can ask something similar for plants. This is what we do at the Minimal Intelligence Lab. Now you know the name of the lab. People always say, hey, Paco, why minimal? I say, no, minimal is not the intelligence of the plants. It's ours in not appreciating theirs, right? Minimal Intelligence Lab, the researchers' intelligence, right? That's ourselves. And that's what we do. Would take long to explain why we founded this lab in a philosophy department. But I won't get there. But you can think about it. Maybe we couldn't get to ask the type of questions we wanted to ask if we were doing basic plant physiology or animal psychology, right? So this is the questions we are able to ask precisely because we are outside of the orthodox or mainstream schools. We can time-lapse a climbing plant. That's a climbing plant reaching for a pole. Well, sure. I mean, we can check what the plant is doing, and we can study the kinematics of the plant. And we can check velocities, patterns of acceleration or deceleration. So think about it. I mean, intelligence is not something that you can observe directly. I can infer it. So I can observe your overt behavior, how you behave. If you bump onto the wall every time, I can infer, oh, it's not that smart. You can bump once, twice, but the third time you start to think something's going on wrong here, right? So I cannot observe your intelligence directly. I can infer it out of your overt behavior. Right? So if I'm walking, at night, my son leaves a toy in the corridor, and I pitch black, and I just go to the toilet in the middle of the night without switching the lights on. I tip onto the track he left in the corridor. You cannot see my mental states. But if you study the kinematics, the patterns of velocities, accelerations, you can infer whether I did have the track in mind or I simply didn't know about it and simply just like, you see? Out of if there is not the pattern of deceleration as I'm approaching the target, you can infer that I didn't know it was there. So we can peek into the mind by studying the overt behavior. And that's what you do with plants. The very same thing. We can check what plants are up to by time-lapsing them. So we time-lapse plants, right? We speed them up to see because they are not sitting there doing nothing. They don't stop doing stuff. We just need to make our scale of observation converge with theirs. Either you slow yourself down and sit there for years, or you speed them up, and I said years, but they are faster than you think, right? So I've been doing that. I've been sitting for 2-3 hours, which is what, watching Oppenheimer, can be more challenging, right? You can sit on a stool and watch a climbing beam for 3 hours. Then you get the credits, and off you go, right? They are faster than we think. Look at this one. Not the one you see there, that's the target, that's a host plant, but the one you'll see soon growing to its right. It's a cuscuta, it's a parasitic plant, has no chlorophyll, so it cannot do photosynthesis. It cannot cook its own food, right? So it needs to go to the supermarket, in this case, go somebody else's, drill it, and suck up its sugars. So it's a parasitic plant, right? So that means that if you're a climbing being that has no chlorophyll, you cannot afford to miss it. You've got to be there. You've got to make sure that you are growing in the right direction. See what I mean? You cannot simply be growing. This is the pole. You can be just growing and growing and growing and growing, and then, oops, lucky me. Oh, I bump, I twang around and get up there, right? Find your spot through the canopy and do photosynthesis if you're a climbing plant like the one before that you saw before, right? But then you can tell whether you accidentally bump onto the pole or try to reach for it effortfully. You see? That's what we are doing without anthropomorphizing the plant, looking at the kinematics, right? So check this one. There it goes. Oh, the fridge. Let's go for the fridge and get some food. There it goes. Boom, 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 boom. So it's not growing, could be growing in the other direction. It's actually getting there. And eventually it will get there, and then we'll twine around, and then we'll start to sniff it to see, hey, the content it has, because there might be another plant in the vicinity with more sugars. So they have got to pick, hey, do I open this fridge or this other fridge? Some fridge might be more empty than another, right? Now it's boom, now it's sucking out the sugars, like boom, it's doing great, it's boosting, right? So remember, checkbox number 1 for lobsters, sensory integration. So we have this cartoonish understanding of plant life, like, oh, light, phototropic response, so they grow towards light, as if nothing else was happening. No, they are monitoring all sorts of information, stimuli all over the place, all these parameters, above ground and below ground, right? And they need to integrate it all to provide a response that is globally adaptive. Not simply like a robot. This is not the garage door, like, you walk by, sensor, and then zzz, opens. No, this is not an automatic garage door. So they don't work on pre-programmed routines. They need to say, hey, what's happening here? Oh, this is a light gradient, but there is a chemical gradient, but there is skin recognition. There is other guys doing their own thing. Oh, that's competition, or these are friends, right? Friends or foes. And then this is happening below ground. There is something going on here. So they need to integrate it all. In this case, they are using, in fact, they are telling where the host plant is by the ratio of red to far red light. Because, other plants will be absorbing red. So if you are growing, and you're growing in this direction, or that direction, you remember when you were kids, like this game, you're blindfolded, and then you need to find a present, or a treasure, like a hidden treasure. And then they tell you, cold, 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 or hot, 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 right? That doesn't work if you don't move. If I'm stuck, you cannot give me the tip to say cold or hot. You need to say that as a result of what I do. So if I go like this, then you can say hot. And then I say, hot, okay. But if you say cold, that's what the plant is doing. The plant is growing, and then the ratio of red to far red light can go up or down. If it goes down, there are some guys here absorbing red, right? Then you can grow, and then, I'm growing. The ratio is going up. The ratio is going down. Up, down. Okay, here we go. Hot, hot, hot. You see? But not just that. That in the context of vibrational cues, there is vibrational information, there is volatiles, organic volatile compounds, so molecules, airborne molecules being emitted by the host plant. So there's all this information out there. You need to make sense of it. You need someone sitting at the wheel, right? Sure, it's a decentralized wheel, so don't look for the little Paco in the head, but don't look for the little Paco here, neither in my case. So neither plants nor humans have a little guy at the wheel. That's a way of speaking. In both cases, not just for plants. So we think, who could be doing the driving in the case of the plant? As if we knew that who is doing the driving in our own case, right? You see, we fool ourselves into thinking that, I usually say that with Planta Sapiens, that we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So we get to know more about plant intelligence, but we get to rethink what we mean by human intelligence. So there is nobody sitting at the wheel either in our case, right? So that's the way to go. So this is what we did, okay? Remember, point number 2, anesthetics. So this was fun, thinking about textbooks. Remember the textbook thing, the Ptolemies of the future generations. So I took a Venus flytrap. You know Venus flytrap, right? So you touch the inner hair and then it snapshots. Well, you've got to touch it twice, right? So if you touch it once, it won't shut because it wants to avoid false positives, right? Because something accidentally touches me, you don't want to snapshot. But if something touches me within 20 seconds, oh, this is an insect, like, okay? Then you shut. But hold on a sec. Something could touch me twice in 20 seconds and still be 2 accidental touches. So, double security check. They say third, because if it's something that is an insect and you snapshot, then it will start to freak out, right? If it's an insect, it will freak out. Then it will 3, 4, 5. So there is a paper that says Venus flytrap counts to 5. Only when it gets to 5, then it starts secreting the digestive enzymes to decompose the exoskeleton of the insect, right? So if you could talk to the insect, you should tell him, don't freak out. Your only chance to survive is to stay still. Don't move at all. Because if it doesn't go from 2 to 5, it won't secrete digestive enzymes, right? But of course, they don't know that and they freak out, right? Now, but we can take the Venus flytrap to the vet. We did. We took it to the vet school at University of Murcia, my hometown. And then we said, hey, you have, we put it on the, where they put to sleep cats and dogs and cows and horses. It's a vet school. So that's the molecule, the anesthetic that is being used customarily to anesthetize animals. And they say, can you give me the bottle? So we cannot put the mask, you see the mask at the back? So we cannot just mask them and have them inhale the anesthetic. We can put it into a glass bottle, right? So that's no spoiler. So the book Planta Sapiens gets started just with that. We started anesthetizing a plant, right? So what counts as that's not what really, no problem with that revealing you anything because what counts is what comes next. So the idea is that there is a physiological explanation as to how they do it. And that's not that interesting, despite that is what people think is interesting. So people say, hey, but how can you possibly anesthetize them if they have no neurons? Remember, navel gazing, as if having neurons was what counts. So having neurons is one solution we found, evolutionarily speaking. But did you sign any agreement that you must have them, otherwise you cannot do anything? I mean, we found that trick. We need to go shopping to cook dinner. They don't have to go shopping to cook dinner. They have other tricks. So they have different problems. They came out with different solutions, their own solutions. So remember, remove yourself from the picture. We don't provide any gold standard. They don't have neurons. They don't need them. So when people say, oh, plants can't afford to be stupid. They are sessile, they are rooted, they have no neural tissue. I say, hold on a sec. Why don't you reverse the argument? Say, hey, how smart they've got to be to keep passing their genes, to be here with us today, despite being sessile, despite not having neurons. You see how arrogant we are? Instead of saying, hey, they cannot be because they need to resemble me, say, oh, how many different ways to do their own things, right? They wouldn't be here if they were doing smart stuff, right? So we can anesthetize a plant, and that's what it looks like, right? Now, this is a mimosa, that's not the Venus flytrap, but works the same, right? Think of the mimosa. You touch it, you don't even need to time-lapse them. They are so fast. So you touch it, and they fold, right? Just to avoid the herbivore, like to make it less, sexy, to the munching herbivore, right? So they fold. Check how it does it when it's fully aware, like normal routine, right? So you touch it, and it will just fold, you see? In fact, if you touch it harder, it will fold even more, right? So you get really, really folded up, right? But now, check what happens, bottom left, when you anesthetize the plant. Check this out. Nothing, just boom. Watch, it's not dead. It's anesthetized. It might be dead, right? By accident, as happened to me in the past. Oh, the dose was too much. So you've got to gauge the dose, right? Like with animals. But check what happens bottom right when it comes out of anesthesia, right? see now, starts to fall, but more slowly, more clumsily. It's like, hey, what's happening here? Right? It's like coming out of anesthesia. Well, it's not. You see, I said it's like it's not like coming out. It's coming out of anesthesia. The plant is coming out of anesthesia, not like coming out. You see what I mean? What I'm trying to say is that we need to think hard about how to remove ourselves from the picture, I insist. Because otherwise we say, no, it's like, no. The plant is coming out of anesthesia. So, textbooks of 21, 25. What do you think people will say when we discuss this? No, this is just a physiological response. Sure, the drug, puts them off, but that's it. End of the story. Well, remember the check boxes for animals. Response to anesthetics. If the lobster is responding, you can anesthetize the lobster. You think, there's got to be sentient because they come out of anesthesia. They recover their awareness. Well, think about it. Think about it, really. This is not a metaphor. I mean it scientifically. What does it mean for a plant to come out of anesthesia? So what is it that the plant is recovering? Isn't it the same question that with the lobster? I mean, to come out of anesthesia is to recover something that you had lost temporarily. I would touch it, it wouldn't fall. Why are you again? Oh, I went back to normal. Here I am again, right? You see, you can do that. To come back to normal doesn't mean to have neurons, doesn't mean to have the type of mental state that you will have when you come out of anesthesia. It means to have theirs. So their experiences, their responses, theirs, not yours. Doesn't need to resemble yours. But coming out of anesthesia is something that has to do with life. If life can be anesthetized, then the question arises, what does it mean for life to come out of anesthesia? And life, I mean bacteria, fungi, plants, life, tree of life, right? So, see what I mean? Sentience has to do with being alive, not with belonging to the animal kingdom, right? In fact, now, number 3, remember learning. Well, you can have strawberries, and you can teach them to associate stimuli. They can grow towards nutrient patches that are associated with different light intensity, high light intensity or low light intensity, right? So remember Pavlov's dog? Like, the bell and the food? Bell, food, and the dog ends up salivating just with the bell because, I got the trick. I connected the dots. After the bell, food comes next. So it starts to salivate just with the bell. You've conditioned the response. Well, if you can condition the response of a plant, and we're talking likewise about the plant, in this case, a non-neural organism being able to connect its own dots, this means that. You see? You see what I mean? Now, question for you. If plants are slow to grow, which is true, isn't it for them equally important to be able to anticipate? Because if it takes time for me to reach my goal, if I don't get there immediately, it takes time for me, it's even more important for me to make sure that I'm growing in the right direction. Like the cuscuta, the parasitic plant, I need to grow in the right direction to get the sugars. I can't afford to miss it because in 3 days, I won't have any energy left from the seed. I need to reach there in the first 2-3 days, otherwise, boom, right? So if it takes time for you to reach your goal, you make sure you know in which direction you are growing, right? You need to connect the dots. Have cues. This usually comes with that. Thank you. You trained me. Or the environment, my local environment. Okay, now I know what's going to come next, right? You see, this has nothing to do with animals or neurons. It has to do with a form of life being sensitive to its surroundings, and the surroundings providing the type of regularities that are informative as to how to keep behaving. You see? No esoteric, this is science for non-neural organisms. In fact, this is Drosophila, the fruit fly, right? So fruit fly, that, we don't care about them. You don't sign any ethical agreement in the lab to do research on Drosophila. You finish your experiment, off they go to the basket. Can you imagine doing that with a dolphin? You wouldn't, right? Well, with Drosophila, they are animals, fruit flies. I know that we don't like them on our salad, but they are animals. The question is, are they sentient? Well, now we know, this is just from 2022, we know that Drosophila is able to perform associative learning, an enhanced form in which there is a temporal gap in the presentation of the stimuli. So one stimuli comes, then there is a temporal gap, next stimuli comes next, right? So that means that, hey, they need to retain the information, a trace, a memory trace. That's why it's called trace conditioning. So I retain in memory this little thing, and then connect the dots. That's what Drosophila does. So if the fruit fly can be anesthetized, integrate sensory information, can connect the dots, then we check, and conclude that looks like Drosophila is sentient. Well, if plants can do all those things, we should be concluding the same unless on prejudice alone we are navel-gazing, right? I have very little time left, right? 10 minutes? Okay, good. So think of melatonin. Melatonin, we know it induces sleep in our Drosophila, right? That fruit fly, we know melatonin works to induce sleep, right? Now, you know what happens? That we know the role melatonin plays likewise in plants. The one and only problem is that that role being played in plants, we treat it simply physiologically. So in plants, plant physiologists tell us, hey, Paco, why do you talk about plant intelligence or plant sentience? This is just physiological responses. Yeah, sure. I mean, we know what melatonin does. You can reduce stress. They can, have an effect on rate of photosynthesis. We have many things that we can explain physiologically. In the same way, we can explain physiologically the way you anesthetize non-neural tissue, right? They simply mess up, the drug messes up membrane properties, and ions cannot cross the border, the membrane, and then you don't get the spike of voltage. It doesn't fire off, right? So that's something physiological. What's not physiological was the question I raised. What does it mean to come out of anesthesia? And again, we can ask another question. Apart from those things, I bet if you cross the pond, like I was 3 weeks ago coming back from the States, and I was jet-lagged, right? I bet I saw these people on JFK, New York, with their cage, with their pet. I bet they were thinking, is my pet jet-lagged? Because I'm, dazed and confused. I bet my pet is also feeling kind of awkward, right? I mean, it was like dinner time, then all of a sudden they're having breakfast. I mean, these guys are on a different time zone. It's going to take a few days for me to, to catch up, right? So you're jet-lagged. What do? We take synthetic melatonin, right? You don't need to confess tonight, but many people in the middle of the night walk to the cabinet in the kitchen and take some synthetic melatonin when you cannot sleep. Okay? Adults sometimes do that, right? Well, you know what? Plants biosynthesize their own melatonin. And you can actually, this is our lab. That's the experiment we do on melatonin. We are testing jet lag in plants. Right? So plants, legumes, climbing means they fold their leaves, right? So they fold their leaves at night. So sun sets, they fold their leaves. Sun rises in the morning, they unfold them. Anticipatorily. So they fold them before the sun sets. They unfold them before the sun rises. So they are ready to go, right? But if we can shift the photoperiod, we can just make the sunset later or earlier, in case you are crossing the pond eastwards or westwards. We can fake it and induce a form of jet lag. You see? And then we can check whether that's disrupting their daily routines. Will they still do their daily business as usual, or are we disrupting somehow their expectations, right? Well, we can do that. We can also do something else, which is we insert electrodes and register the electrophysiological activity. So we can see how their leaves are folding and unfolding. We shift the photoperiod, and we can check the neural correlates, the phytoneural correlates. So the electrical activity within the plant, the flows of current traveling throughout the plant body, to check for correlations, as you do when you have an EEG, right? I can check your behavior or just some neuroimaging and see what lights up as you are behaving. Well, we can see what lights up within the plant as well, right? To see if we are disrupting them. And then, this is what's interesting to me, we can add melatonin. As you take a pill, a tablet, when you travel or can't sleep or something, we can see what the effect of melatonin is, right? And see whether that puts them back in the rhythm. You see, we can ask universal questions that cross the borders of kingdoms. We are not anthropomorphizing them, but checking out or trying to identify what unites us all in the tree of life, despite diversity. They have their own circadian clocks, sure. So why not? They biosynthesize their own phytomelatonin. So they synthesize it. We are so arrogant, humans, that we think, oh, thank you, that comes handy to me. I'm going to synthesize it, pay a patent, and make a fortune. And we don't think, hey, what does the plant use the melatonin for? So the plant is biosynthesizing its own melatonin, and we don't think it has the same effect as with us. They use it to get out of jet lag. That's the working hypothesis that we are testing in the lab. You see, I don't want you to believe it because we are romanticizing plants. I want you to appreciate the way the scientific discourse can throw light upon the inner doings of plants. Not metaphorically, but literally. So I say Planta Sapiens, Homo sapiens, is not a way of speaking, it's literal, right? We are trying to peek into their sentience in the same way we do with animals, right? Okay, very little time left. Let me I skip all this, but believe me, they can do all these things, right? Plenty of stuff they can do, right? Now, that's just, I'm almost there. That's just an interesting case because, they have glutamate, GABA, serotonin, dopamine, all our neurotransmitters, right? If only plant physiologists would say, no, this is just in plants a metabolite, right? The byproduct of metabolic activity, right? It's not a signaling molecule. It's not playing any signaling role, right? As neurotransmitters, right? So look, this is a plant in which glutamate is helping, you see a calcium wave, which is being triggered by glutamate, the neurotransmitter, right? And it's being used to spread information throughout the plant body because there is a munching caterpillar. You'll see it fluorescent, right? So you see now it's munching the leaf. It will boom. That calcium wave triggered by the glutamate is flagging that, hey, there is a munching caterpillar nearby. You guys start secreting toxins. Let's get rid of this pest, right? So you'll see it here better. Now, we put the glutamate, and then look the wave, how it, boom, wow, beautiful. That's it. That's glutamate triggered, right? Now, how do you mean just a metabolite? That's systemic signaling. That's orchestrating the whole plant behavior. It's putting the whole plant body into a single perspective. Remember the integration, somebody being at the wheel despite being decentralized. You see? But still, we have neurons, they don't. No, that cannot be a signaling role because neurotransmitters relate to synapses. You don't have synapses because you don't have neurons, you don't need a chemical bridge. Sorry. You see? Instead of saying, hey, let's revise what we mean by a neurotransmitter in light of the evidence that it plays the same systemic signaling role across nature, across the tree of life. Now, finishing here. This is important to me, very important, probably the most important slide. Why? Because we are used to talking to fellow academics and things like this, universities, ivory towers, and that sort of game. And we don't realize how important it is to reach out and to have lay audiences and people from all walks of life. Some of you might be academics, some of you might do whatever. I mean, all sorts of professions, hobbies, activities, experiences, whatever, right? To me, what's important is that we should all feel engaged in the debates. This is not a debate for ivory towers in closed campuses. Why? Sidney Brenner said it beautifully. A few years ago, Nobel Prize winner, he's one of the fathers of molecular biology, right? So in the 70s, when he was at Cavendish in Cambridge, it was the mecca of molecular biology, they were sitting like the 20 guys, like the people who knew everything, right? We are talking about the same place with Watson and Crick, the double helix, right? So these guys were sitting there, they were stuck with this problem, molecular biology problem. They were like, hey, stuck in this problem, whatever the problem was. And then what do? 20 people with their expertise, they can't solve a problem. They hire molecular biologist number 21. What for? Same frame of mind, same questions, same paradigm, one more guy stuck. But at the time, they had this visiting from the by then Soviet Union, from Moscow. I forgot, maybe he was a computer scientist or an engineer, but anything. He wasn't a molecular biologist, right? And the guy, ignorant as he was the only one able to get out of the stalemate. He was like, hey, have you tried, or why don't you see, he made a silly question, and what effectively was the way out, because he was able to see the problem from a different perspective, a different angle. And that is the power of ignorance, right? So we should all be feeling like we are engaged, like we are part of the debate, because precisely many times, the closer you are to the problem, the less you see. You need to zoom back to enlarge the picture and treat it, multidisciplinarily from many, many different angles. Something similar happened with Orson Welles. Again, Orson Welles, it was a revolution in cinema, Citizen Kane. He was 25. 25. So this means that it was his first film, opera prima. He came from theater. And it was a revolution in cinema. All aspects of cinema were revolutionized by Orson Welles. So he was being interviewed 20 years later by this BBC journalist, and the guy went like, hey, you're a genius, right? I mean, you were 25, so you knew the whole history of cinema because you knew everything precisely to know what was missing, what had to be done next. So imagine all you need to know to identify the spot. Say, hey, this is what comes next. Now I know why I'm making Citizen Kane, right? And he was like, well, what are you talking about? He went like, no, it was the freedom of ignorance. So power of ignorance, freedom of ignorance. He said, we didn't have a slightest clue. I mean, that's precisely why we were able to do it, because we didn't know it couldn't be done, right? So reaching and thinking and engaging in this debate requires to think bold, to think different, to think outside the box. And I hope we are all part of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Paco, for this very nice talk, very convincing as well. I think you might have convinced the 5 people that were not convinced yet about plant intelligence.
We could do a test. We could
do it. Yeah, maybe we could do it at the end. Another raise of hands. Now, I was just wondering, because I'm a philosopher of animal minds, and when people at parties ask me what did you do, I just explain something about I think about animal minds. And then usually people start talking about their cats and dogs and how smart they are and what they learn from them. How is that for you? What kind of responses do you get?
With plants?
With plants, yeah.
Oh, which ones are the smart ones and stuff like this? Mm-hmm. Oh, but
or maybe they respond like, "What are you doing at all?" What?
Yeah. Well, first they don't get it. They don't quite get it, right? And especially when I tell them like, "Hey, look, I sit and watch them to the naked eye," this type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's true that it's difficult to come to terms with the type of research you are doing. One of the reasons is that it's very difficult to truly understand that we are not speaking metaphorically, right? So it's even difficult to understand that they behave. So if you are thinking, hey, that in your case, the cat, the dog, they are behaving, they are doing their things, they're chasing this or that, playing with them, they can play. But how do you make sense of a plant playing, right? And yet, it's a scientific question worth asking. That question has been raised in honeybees, right? So we need to operationalize it to be able to measure it. But it's funny because just being within the animal kingdom, you are you can legitimately raise the question, hey, how could we possibly know if a honeybee can play? Maybe it's difficult to tell, but we can have the feeling that we can raise the question. But in the case of plants, if I tell them, no, I'm checking out my plants in my backyard, if they are playing at all or not, first they think Paco
he's crazy.
He's just crazy or something. So it's difficult to convey the message.
So they don't understand. They don't understand what you're doing.
Well, it takes some time. I need to elaborate.
Yeah.
It's difficult to just say yes or no because I'm pretty sure they will misunderstand it.
Yeah.
So it takes some time to get them there. But once this idea of, hey, to me it's so important, the idea of avoiding the double standards. This idea of why do you think this is crazy and you don't think it is not crazy in the case of the animal?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's not play double standards. Let's treat them all equally, quite regardless of the conclusion. So I'm not even defending the answer because I don't know what the answer is. That's the point about science. So it's an open empirical question. We are fighting for the right to raise the question, which is very different, right? Yeah. That's what I try to make them understand.
Yeah. So people, when you explain them, they usually sort of come to see your perspective. But isn't it? I can also imagine that the intuition is still. It feels. Maybe not for this audience, but it feels. I feel like I have to ask some devil's advocate questions because I don't have to convince the audience. But yeah, it feels like when you think about plant intelligence, plant cognition, that doesn't align with our intuition.
Yeah, definitely.
So I can imagine that people will just be like, Paco, you do you, but that's
absolutely. Yeah, they walk away from me. This guy is dangerous.
Yeah.
No, but now seriously, one of the issues we have here, I think, is that we are obsessed with trying to identify what makes us unique, right? Because we somehow can't help thinking that we are special. Either we, Homo sapiens, what I call Homo stupidus, or animals in general, that we are somehow the chosen ones. And if you think about it, it's so awkward. Just think about it. What does it mean to belong to a kingdom? Because the kingdom itself is an abstraction. That's a border. That's a demarcation line. But it's not real. It doesn't exist. So what exists is the individual. So, hey, are you intelligent? Why? What are you telling me? What can you do? The individual, not the fact that it belongs to a kingdom. Belonging to a kingdom is a way of speaking, right? So to me, it's way more interesting to think. So to me, the strategy, methodologically speaking, is not to go and check what the guys that are closer to me can do. Primates, mammals, whatever. It's precisely the other way around. So to me, the interesting issue is to say, hey, let's see what those that are farther apart, farther away, the more distant ones, the more that I, in principle, appear not to be sharing anything with, what those guys are able to do, and what might be uniting us all. So what unites us all despite diversity? Yeah. To me, that's the question. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, because you talked about removing ourselves from the picture a lot. But is that really something that we can do, and how should we proceed in doing that?
Yeah. That's a very difficult exercise, but it's very rewarding. There is no silver bullet, and my tips doesn't need to be helpful for you. I mean, we might find different ways to do it, right? This is like mental gymnastics. We can exercise our mind differently. But at least in my case, it works to proceed piecemeal, step by step. So don't rush it. If you want to go just in one shot from Homo sapiens to Planta Sapiens, it's a long shot. But why don't you go step by step? So chill out. Okay, yeah, sure. I appreciate mammals. Oh, and look at the corvids. And now we know the octopus we mentioned before. Oh, Drosophila, the fruit fly. You see, if you go one by one, and this is way more important, one way to develop empathy, you know what it is? To revisit. So if you're going for a walk, this morning I was on this trail by the promenade, like walk out of the city into the canal, the cows and horses. If I just walk there once, I don't get to engage with anything there. But if I revisit, if I do the same walk every single day, and there is this little plant growing somewhere, I will start to notice the changes. I will start to appreciate their doings, the meaning-making on its behalf. So to put yourself in their shoes, remember the skull vignette, to put yourself in their shoes requires that you spend enough time in their time scale looking at the world, trying to look at the world from their perspective. Oh, what is it that matters to them? Think of flowers, petals. When you look at the petals of a flower, we think of flowers, of the ones in the flower shop, like, oh, wow, these colors, right? We are not putting ourselves in the shoes of the plant. Think of the flowers under UV light, right? Under UV light, because that's the type of petal that pollinators see. So the pollinator, they don't see the flower you're looking at. They see a different flower. Under UV light, you will see different stripes, bull eyes, so different pattern altogether. That's the flower that counts, the one that co-evolved with the pollinator. So putting yourself in their shoes requires that we try to think hard as to what matters to them, right? Not to us.
But if you talk about putting ourselves in the shoes of plants, aren't you speaking metaphorically there? Because you say I'm not speaking metaphorically if we speak about, for instance, about intelligence. But if you talk about putting yourself in the shoes of plants, what?
No. If you think, imagine you put yourself in the shoes of a bear. Well, you might think, oh, they might enjoy honey. So imagine you put yourself in the shoes of a bat. You might say, oh, bats echolocate. Okay, let's check these surfaces. Okay, will the bat go nuts here? Let's see how those materials make ultrasonics bounce off the walls, right? So we might engage with the way they monitor their local environment and then design or think of what type of environment might be stressful to them or not. So one trick that works is to think that the question doesn't truly change when you are thinking of a plant as opposed to an animal. So in this exercise of avoiding anthropomorphizing them, it's the same. All you need to be doing is simply customizing, not changing the question, but customizing the spatiotemporal scales, for example. Think of the dog, Pavlov's dog. We mentioned the bell and the food, right? And salivation. And we said, hey, plants might be able to connect their own dots. That requires that we think about the time scale and the type of stimuli. So what is the bell? What sort of bell would the plant care about? What is to salivate for the bell? For the plant, of course, it's not to salivate. It's what sort of response can be conditioned. And that might require that we think of a temporal span way longer. And we might miss it precisely because we are obsessed with our own time scale and think, hey, it's got to respond now, look at the dog. Here's the bell. What happens to the plant? Hey, the plant might need a few days because it's its own temporal scale. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Customize the protocols.
But I think that part of the question is, so if you look at animals, for instance, they might have eyes and ears. They can sense smell, and
that's a good point.
So it's easier to imagine yourself in the perspective of an animal that has a head with the sensory apparatus, as compared to an animal to a plant that does not have that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because look, there is this book by Daniel Chamovitz, a plant scientist from Israel. It's called What a Plant Knows. And you will find 5 chapters. Right? So how can you think of plant senses by equating their alleged senses, how they would correspond to our 5 senses? I mean, this is easier. Imagine we were not on planet Earth. So let's travel back in time, a few million years ago. Humans don't exist. Animals don't exist. We wouldn't be able to ask what their 5 senses are, because 5 doesn't make any sense, because we are not here to provide the gold standard. So you could simply ask, hey, how do they sense their surroundings, right? So the problem is when we think from that perspective, just whichever senses they have. In fact, they have 20 plus senses. Now, they don't even have their senses located spatially. I mean, they don't look for their ears. Their ears are distributed, are spread all over the body surface. Their whole body is their ear, because they get mechanical stimulation, right, throughout the whole body. Do you know that flowers can discriminate between different vibrational patterns from pollinators? So if I'm the flower, you are my pollinator, the buzzing of the pollinator, the vibrations produced of the one that pollinates me, they can discriminate that type of vibration, that pattern, from the buzzing produced by a different insect that is not my natural pollinator. And only in the first case, my pollinator, they will increase the nectar concentration. Not in the other case, right? Don't think of their ear. Think of their capacity, provided their needs, and the lack of centralized organs. Because the fact that they don't have centralized organs is simply due to being sessile. So you have 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, 1 heart. If I just remove your heart, bye, bus. But you can flee, you can defend yourself, you can do many things, right? Because you have to preserve your beloved organs. Since plants can flee, their strategy is to divide and conquer. So you cannot pull their ear. Their ear is all over the place. But you won't find 2 lungs and 2 kidneys here or there. That's their strategy. So different problems, different solutions. That doesn't mean they don't have their senses.
Yeah. So they also have the capacity for hearing, for instance, or even... Well,
there is a field called phytoacoustics.
Yeah. It's just that we're not we have to learn how to see
That's
this.
it. That's it.
And then, so you touched upon neurons and especially why they're not important in considering this. But could you elaborate on that? So why are neurons not important for intelligence?
Well, it's not that neurons are not important. It's that they are not important for them. I mean, for us, they are damn important, right? Well, not even with a caveat. Now, when I mentioned that we get to kill two birds with one stone, one was like, hey, we get to appreciate plant intelligence, and we get to rethink ours. Part of rethinking ours has to do with this cartoonish understanding of human intelligence that we have. Like, first, being that neurocentric. Nowadays, we speak of embodied cognition, embodied cognitive science, embodied intelligence, which says that non-neural aspects are way more important than we think. So the body is not simply to provide me the support, and then Paco is here. No, Paco is all over the place. Paco is extended. Paco is embodied. Paco is enacting with the local environment. So that's called embodied cognition. It's embodied, embedded, enacted, extended, right? They call it 4E, all those 4Es, right? So that means that even though neurons are important, they, by themselves, they wouldn't suffice. That's trivial, right? But we put too much burden. We think too much about their role and too little about the role of the non-neural aspects, including the environment, right? I said including the environment because you know one thing that we share. So this is the thing. We don't share neurons. You have neurons, I'm a plant, I don't have neurons, right? But the point is not that, what we don't share. The point is that what we truly share is not what lies in the head. So what really counts is not what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of. And that's what we share. We share the environment. We share planet Earth. Let me just elaborate a bit. Because here the idea is that remember the connecting of the dots and the circadian clocks and plants being jet-lagged. We say, oh, they don't have neurons, they don't have this, they don't have that, how can they be jet-lagged? And they say, hold on a sec. What we share is the planetary regularities. So the sun sets and rises for all life on Earth. Surprise, surprise, no surprise, we all evolved circadian clocks. Because this is big news to any form of life. You know, sunsets, predators come out, or time for you to hunt, sun rises, or temperature drops. So all these planetary regularities are meaningful, are informative, are of great value if you pick on them. So what life form could afford not to connect those dots? We share that. We share the world we inhabit, despite the diversity in terms of constitution.
Yeah, but how would that work, for instance, in the case of memory, for instance? So I'm thinking about in the philosophy in the study of animal minds, you have this capacity called episodic memory, and it's the capacity to remember what, where, and when something happened. For instance, how your birthday was last year. And then they study this same thing in different kinds of species. So at one point also octopuses, but also honeybees. But they found that, for instance, honeybees can only do it if it's circadian time. So if the memory has some relation to their circadian rhythm. And then there are critics who say, well, no, real episodic memory, that doesn't need that should not be tied to these kinds of regularities. So if we look at these kinds of regularities, these things, what you say, so look at what's happening in the environment. Are you then really, is that the same kind of memory as humans have?
Well, that's really interesting. You know why? Because here we are assuming a type of cognitive psychology. Episodic memory, all these labels are being used in cognitive psychology. Customarily, I'm not complaining, but that's just a school of thought.
Yeah.
And we don't rethink our psychology. We only rethink our plant physiology. When you think about what we mean by memory, we learn that, hey, we have this cartoonish understanding of memory. Like you know, it's like, what do I have? Cards in my head, and I pull out the card from a drawer?
And then the question is, where do the plants put their memories?
No, the question is where we all put our memories. Because we are assuming that we know how they work in humans, right? That's what I mean. That we have to rethink what we mean by retrieving from memory. Retrieving from memory, even in humans, is not that something is being stored here, and then I open the drawer and withdraw and retrieve it. That's, again, our cartoonish understanding of human memory. Now, quite regardless of whether we share a type of memory that a school of thought calls episodic memory, right? A different issue is how embodied memories are. So sometimes we enact them, right? So you don't retrieve them from your neural tissue, but you do things. And by performing, we perceive an act, and in the closing of this loop of perception and action, remember the example of the plant growing in one direction or another. I was saying, hey, hot, hot, cold, cold, and then, right? So that's the way we engage, and we find meaning out of that, not something being stored, by recreating things, by behaving out there, right? In the case of plants, it's even more interesting because they grow. And in a sense, if you want to find where things get stored, if we can use that word at all, they get stored in their past pattern of growth. It's so amazing to see mature trees because you see what they were up to 100 years time ago, right? So this thick branch was twisting here and that thickened this way. So you can see what was important at that time when they perform a U-turn or not, right? That stays there. And in the same way we can embody or outsource into the body and the environment many of our cognitive tasks, which is one of the reasons we are moving away from this cognitive understanding, that happens with plants even more easily to appreciate, because if anything, they are bodies, precisely because we cannot rely on their neural tissue, right?
It's also there that you think that plants can help us to rethink
absolutely
ourselves.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we, again, neurons are needed, great to have them. I'm not going to get rid of them, or at least I'll try not to. But they are not the silver bullet. They are part of the equation. That's it.
Yeah.
Don't ignore the rest of constraints, non-neural constraints.
Okay, and then maybe one of the more controversial things in your book is plant consciousness.
Right.
And not just talking about plant intelligence or cognition, but plant consciousness.
Yeah.
So maybe how, why, when did you start to consider plant consciousness? So you ask the question, what is it like to be a plant?
Yeah. That's a tricky question. Because first if you are going to think first in terms of the experimental designs, right? So if you're going to design an experiment, you truly need to put yourself in their shoes to decide which stimuli to use, what temporal constraints, the details in terms of the parameters, the variables. So you really need to think hard to make it as ecological as possible, right? Not just an artifact in the lab, but hey, what do they care about? What do they do? That's what I think that we need to be moving out of the lab into the field and do plant ethology. Like a primatologist, not studying primates in a cage, but going out there in the forest and checking out what they do. We need to become plant ethologists. Now, in becoming a plant ethologist myself, which I'm in the process of, which means asking for funding for field trips. If you know any funders around, please raise your hands. But it's important, not kidding, it's really important to move out of the lab into the field. And there comes the question of why would you care about sentience? Because then you have all these ethical dilemmas that you raise when you appreciate their doings. Ask Jane Goodall, ask people out there checking out life in its own setting, right? You start to become, to be marveled by the richness of their behavioral repertoires, how they feel, how they, suffer. And if that is the case, you couldn't turn the blind eye on that question. So there is an ethical dilemma, right? Certainly. If life can be stressed, if life can suffer, how can we turn the blind eye to those questions? So,
yes, maybe so the question of plant consciousness maybe is still open, but I want to follow up on this because what would be the ethical implications according to you?
Yeah, well, that's the most difficult part, right? Because I have recently we submitted a paper to the journal Animal Sentience. Animal Sentience. Yeah. I mean, the name of the journal.
They accepted it.
Yeah. Well, it was an invited target article, like for then a group of commentators to comment on the target. So they wanted us to give like a survey of plant sentience, them to trash us, right? That's the point I'm getting at. The attitude, even of the editor-in-chief of this journal and most of the commentators, were like, to me, a little naive in the following sense. They, knowing that it was a very hard pill to swallow, the fact that plants might be sentient, because you're not going to sleep tight. You're going to have issues when you go to bed in the evening. Oh, my God, right? So because of those ethical dilemmas, they were rejecting the very possibility of plant sentience. No, plants cannot be sentient, because otherwise, I mean, what? Some people say, hey, I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian. When I give talks, they say, hey, so always somebody says, I'm a vegan, now what? So, no, those are two different questions. We cannot mix them up. So you cannot, put it this way, you cannot, on the grounds that you are facing an ethical dilemma that you don't know how to confront, on those grounds, you cannot decide whether plants are sentient or not, based on how easy it is for you to sleep tight or not, right? So if they are sentient, there is a fact of the matter. And we might never discover. And a different issue is, where does that leave us? In what position, in what situation, right?
Yeah, because have you thought about that? What if plants are sentient?
Yeah.
What should we eat?
Well, no.
How should we eat?
Yeah. No, somebody said, do I lick rocks or what do I do? Well, minerals.
Yeah, some salt. Yeah.
But no, remember what I said about the kingdom itself being an abstraction. That what counts is not belonging to a kingdom, animal kingdom, but what happens to this individual, to this subject, to this agent, right? So the problem with plants, I mean, even go to environmental studies. I mean, my daughter started studying environmental studies at the university, then she moved to biotechnology, but I was able to pick on her notes before she quit it, and that was amazing. You see, the magic word in environmental studies is resource. Resources. The only discussion is, how do we exploit our resources? So more or less wisely, right? But we don't drop the term. We keep calling them resources because we need them for oxygen, textile, clothing, food, fuel, whatever, for everything, in fact, right? But that is not the point, because what happens that if we imagine, evolutionarily speaking, we had taken a different path and we didn't need them for some reason, right? That's a possibility, empirical possibility. So imagine we didn't actually need them. Does that mean that we wouldn't have to care for them because they are not our resources anymore? If life has an intrinsic value, it's got to be respected quite regardless of whether I need it or not. Otherwise, it's because of selfish interests, right? But life itself has a value. Now, what do you do when life has a value? Do I go nuts because I'm killing bacteria? We're live, right? It's all over the place, right? There is nothing you can do about it. Now, one thing you can do is to drop this kingdom discussion. So imagine you just get rid of the animal kingdom versus plant kingdom. Because one thing that I find intriguing about the debate in the dietary, by the way, I'm not suggesting by any means what we should be eating, right? Of course. Just out of curiosity, if you want to know, I'm omnivorous. I eat everything, and I mean it, everything.
But then you consider how it was grown, or
that's what I'm getting at.
Sorry.
No, you got it. I mean, the point is not the kingdom itself, but we should be asking, hey, this thin organism, agent that ended up on my plate, did it go through some form of suffering that was not truly necessary in the handling prior to getting to my table? That's what we should be asking about the individual, because the kingdom itself is an abstraction. So what did you actually go through that I could have avoided before you are on my plate? Quite regardless of what kingdom you come from. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I have many more questions, but I'm also very curious about the questions from the audience. But before we go there, maybe one last question. So in your book, you write about Darwin and how he studied plants. And he studied plants about 175 years ago. Do you think that maybe 175 years from now, we will look very differently at plant intelligence, maybe compared to how we look at animal intelligence now as compared to a long time ago?
Well, thanks for that question. That's a very interesting question. You know why? because I think we are not progressing that much, because this is something, no, this is really, this is something I tell my students, because they are confused with this idea of having the money to buy expensive equipment. So if you have the funding, you buy the toys, the gadgets, you get to play with them. And today we have this especially younger generations. Oh yeah, sure. I mean, you buy all these cams, all this gear. Okay, with settings, I can even do it from remotely. Okay, just put the settings. Off you go to the beach. Then on Monday I'll come back to the lab and check what the plant did. I just watch the clip, and wow, no way. Darwin was able to see way more than we see nowadays to the naked eye. He couldn't time lapse. And it's amazing, Darwin's botany. So it's true that in the book there is a morsel of Darwin in every chapter, but not just out of paying tribute to him, but because what he was saying, the message, is something we haven't got yet. And it's amazing. I'm still fascinated by the fact that he was able to see more to the naked eye than I do as of 2025 through the study we do. That means that the frame of mind, that training your eye, is what truly counts. So are we closer? No, I think Darwin was closer. So it's not like scientific progress is not linear. I think we are doing like this. In 100 years' time, I hope we are again on a peak as we were 2 centuries ago, right? But science progress is like this, not like this.